morning. The European Union Free Trade Agreement with Vietnam. Opportunities for Vietnamese and European Union businesses. This will be the topic of my presentation today. However, in order to understand better the issue, let's have a look first of all to the main trade policy issues of Vietnam. Vietnam export 213 billion US dollars and import 211 billion US dollars with a slight surplus in trade balance of around 2 billion US dollars. So Vietnam exports is an important exporting country. What are the main products exported by Vietnam? Telephone and spare parts, 45 billion US dollars, which is the result of the so-called Samsung effect. Samsung recently invested in Vietnam, and Vietnam represents the main assembly hub for all the mobile phone, most of the mobile phone and other electronic products of Samsung. Then textiles and electronics, computers and components, 25.9 billion US dollars. Then we have footwear, which is a very important exported items for Vietnam. What Vietnam import? Vietnam imports components for producing telephone and other electronic equipment, 37.5 billion US dollars. It imports machinery, instruments and other accessories in order to assemble and produce all the main industrial products such as textiles and garment and footwear, and imports also other types of components for textiles and footwear production. What are the main trading partners of Vietnam? The US is the main exporting market in 2017. Vietnam exported around 20 billion US dollars. The second is European Union, 18, and the third China with 15 billions. ASEAN countries, the association of 10 members, 9 plus Vietnam, is an important partner too. Vietnam export 10 billion US dollar. Then we have Japan with 8 and Korea with 7. From the importing side, the most important countries exporting to Vietnam is China, 27 billion US dollars. Then Korea, 22 billions. ASEAN, 13. Japan, 8. And European Union export only 6, and United States only 4 billion US dollars. This means that there is a huge trade surplus for Vietnam with regard to the European Union and the United States. So the exports and imports from Vietnam to the European Union increased. The EU import from Vietnam increased from 21 billion US dollar in 2011 to 44 billion in 2016. In 5 years, the increase has been more than 110%, and it is the country with the growth of export, with the highest growth of export in these 5 years. On the other side, the European Union export from Vietnam moved from 7.3 billions in 2011 to 10.3 billions in 2016, plus 41%. Of course, even this is very interesting because it is the market where the European Union increased most its exports since 2011, plus 41%. Well, it indeed is the second market after Qatar, but Qatar is another story. Well, said that, what we can say that the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, we are going to see what is it and what are the main consequences. But first of all, the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, it's very important for Vietnam because it will further increase the opportunities to export to Vietnam to the European Union for Vietnamese exporters, and for the European Union will allow the European Union to definitely increase their potential export to Vietnam, which are still limited, and this is reflected by the deficit in the trade balance of the European Union with regard to Vietnam. What is the free trade agreement? Well, first of all, a free trade agreement is an agreement between two countries aiming to eliminate all tariff and non-tariff barriers. This is the main issue. But of course, the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement is an agreement of last generation. So besides the elimination of tariff, we have several other sectors which are covered by the agreement, trading goods, besides trading goods. For example, the agreement with Vietnam will try to eliminate all the export duties of Vietnam, not only import duties, but also export duties. It will regulate technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And it's very important because one of the main reasons products of Vietnam exported to the European Union are rejected by the European Union customs is the fact that the products of Vietnam, they are not able to comply with the technical regulations and sanitary regulations of the European Union. Vice versa, several problems of EU exports are due to the fact that the European Union export suffers from difficulties, bureaucracies, administrative requirements applied by Vietnamese customs and other agencies when the products of the European Union are presented to the Vietnamese custom for their clearing. And that's for this reason we have also covered in the agreement customs and trade facilitation issues. But also important is the chapter on trading services, which allow, especially trading services in Europe. In Europe, trading services is a very important topic, is a very important part of the economy, to have more access in Vietnam. We have a chapter on rules of origin, on the protection of investment, and other opening the government procurement. Government procurement are the procurement of goods and services by the government and state agencies. And of course, in Vietnam, it's a very important topic because it represents around 20% of the GDP. Regulations for state-owned enterprises, again, very important for Vietnam, where state-owned enterprises benefits in these moments from a preferential treatment from state. Further protection of intellectual property rights, which is another topic which is very important, and important chapter on trade and environment and trade and social rights. So these are the main topics covered by the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. The Vietnam export to the European Union and the Vietnam imports from the European Union reflects, in general, Vietnam export and Vietnam import. Indeed, 30% of the export to the European Union are represented by telephone, and then 13% footwear, 12% textiles and garments, 7% electronics and computers, and 5% fisheries. These are the main exported products to the European Union by Vietnam. On the other side, the main export from European Union to Vietnam are machinery and equipment, around 28% of the total exports of European Union to Vietnam. The second one is pharmaceutical, 12%, and that's the reason why in the agreement there is also a chapter on pharmaceuticals. Chemicals, 7%. So you can see that the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement respond to the main worries and the main opportunities presented by the present situation in trade, in the trade policy and the trade relations between the two entities. What are the implications? What will change for the European Union for exporting to the European Union? At present, Vietnam benefits from a unilateral trade program applied by the European Union, which is called Generalized System of Preferences, which is again a unilateral system adopted by all the developed countries to provide some preferences in tariff to developing countries. You know that the normal tariff in international trade are those tariffs that each state apply according to the agreement of the WTO. However, the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences applied by the European Union to all the countries, allow developing countries to export their products at a lower customs duties. These allow Vietnam to export, of course, products at a lower customs duties than those exported to the European Union, for example, from China. However, this is a unilateral program, and a unilateral program from the European Union, meaning that it can be withdrawn by the European Union in any moment. meaning that Vietnam would lose in case of some conditions applied by the verified by the European Union applies. For example, this has happened already a few years ago when the European Union withdrew the preferences applied on the Vietnamese imports because of the increase on footwear, because of the huge increase of footwear export to the European Union. The free trade agreement, on the other side, on the contrary, is an agreement, and differently from the present situation, this agreement will be valid until the two countries will decide to withdraw it. But there should be an agreement in order not to apply anymore the agreement, the free trade agreement. This will ensure predictability and more transparency for all the Vietnamese export in the future. Moreover, the present situation, the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, is limited. The tariff preferences are limited only to some percentage of the general duty applied by the European Union on the import of Vietnam, meaning that, for example, if the European Union applied the 17% on the import of textiles and garments, according to the agreement, 12% on the import of textiles and garments, according to the Generalized System of Preferences, the European Union applied 9.6% of custom duties. We will see that the situation will be completely different with the European Union. So these are the main general advantages of concluding a free trade agreement compared to the present situation. Elimination of all the tariff, elimination of a lot of, of course for Vietnam, in this case, elimination of all the tariff. For the European Union, elimination of the tariff, but in this case, the elimination of the tariff has a higher magnitude for the European Union than for Vietnam when they export to the European Union, because the Vietnamese tariff are much higher than the tariff applied by the European Union on the import of Vietnam. So the benefits, at least from a tariff point of view, is higher for the European Union side. But of course, for Vietnam, there will be huge, important benefit, because some tariff applied by the European Union on key products exported from Vietnam, especially textiles and garments, and footwear, are still quite high, average more than 10%. This means that in few years, all these tariffs will be reduced to zero. So export from Vietnam of originating products, Vietnamese products to the European Union, will have to pay 0% of custom duties once they arrive into the European Union. So this is very important. On the other side, there are all the other chapters, liberalization on trading services, meaning that the liberalization of trading services is more important for the European Union than for Vietnam, because the services sectors in Vietnam is very limited, is still limited, so it still does not have the maturity to be able to export and to set up commercial presence in Europe, for example, with banks, insurance companies, transport, telecom, and etc. On the other side, the services sectors for the European Union is very important. This means that the European Union will have important advantages with the opening of the market of Vietnam. Another important point is government procurement, opening the market, the European market, for Vietnamese products, for Vietnamese providers of goods and services to be procured by the European Union member state agencies or the European Union organization itself. It's very important for Vietnam, and vice versa. It's important for the European Union exporter of goods and services to be bought, to be procured by Vietnamese state and Vietnamese agencies. Important is the deadline of trade liberalization. I mean that, of course, you may know that the liberalization will cover the 99% of tariff applied by the European Union and Vietnam. And in general, 99% of the value of export from the European Union to Vietnam and from Vietnam to the European Union will be completely liberalized, 0%. So in 7 years for the European Union, so export from Vietnam to the European Union will progressively benefit in 7 years of the complete liberalization for 99% of trade, and vice versa. Vietnam will liberalize the tariff will reduce to zero, 99% of the tariff applied to the European Union export in 10 years, gradually. What does it mean gradually? For example, this means that 71% of the value of Vietnamese export to the European Union will be liberalized at entry into force of the agreement. So immediately 71% of the export from Vietnam to the European Union will be at 0% custom duty. On the other side, 65% of the European Union export to Vietnam will be liberalized since the entry into force of the agreement. For the other products, for the remaining, in the case of the European Union, 29% traded products and 35% for the Vietnamese product exported to the European Union, 29% of the products, Vietnamese products exported to the European Union and 35% of the European products exported to Vietnam, these products will be liberalized gradually according to the agreement. For example, machinery and appliance. So all EU export to Vietnam will be completely liberalized since the entry into force of the agreement. Car and car parts will be liberalized in 7-10 years by Vietnam. This means that Fiat or BMW or Volkswagen or Renault might export in 7 years, and in 10 years car parts and cars duty-free to Vietnam. What does it mean 7 and 10 years? This means that from the entry into force of the agreement and in, for example, for cars, in 11 different stages, from the entry into force to the 10th years, the duties will be reduced to zero. So this means that already in this first year there will be benefit also for those products that will not be completely liberalized since the beginning. And for the European Union tariff on Vietnamese export, for example, garments and apparels will be liberalized in 5-7 years. So this means that, for example, if the tariff is on textiles and garments are average 12%, this means that in 5 years, if a specific product will be liberalized in 5 years, this means that each year the European Union will reduce the custom duties by 2.4%. Footwear liberalized in 7 years for some footwear, 5, 3, or immediately for other types of footwear. Fishery and fish products around 3 years. For example, Pangasius will be free of duty into the European Union in 3 years. And there are some sensitive products such as rice, sweet corn, garlic, mushroom exported from Vietnam to the European Union, which will be liberalized partially with the so-called tariff rate quotas. What is a tariff rate quotas? It's, for example, with the tariff rate quotas, until a certain volume of export, yearly export from Vietnam to the European Union, for example, of rice will be free of duty. Then, when this maximum quantity of rice exceed the ceiling provided by the agreement, Vietnam exporter will have to pay a custom duty. This is important because the European Union has to protect the domestic producers of some products. On services, there are important improvements also, especially for the European Union for the European Union providers of insurance services. There are some interesting achievement and etc. What is the impact for the export of the European Union products into Vietnam and vice versa? Well, the most important achievement for the European Union export to Vietnam are related to those products facing at the present the highest custom duties. So we can say cars, first of all, which is one of the key items suffering with very high custom duties of export, but also pharmaceutical products, which will be in practice liberalized, and some machineries and other products exported from the European Union to Vietnam, for example, electrical products, furniture, iron or steel products. So on the other side, Vietnam will benefit from a complete liberalization in a few years of textiles and garments, footwear, wood and wooden products, even if wood and wooden products already has a very already the European Union apply very low custom duties, and for some key products for Vietnam, such as fisheries, still suffering from quite important custom duties for some fisher, and coffee, tea, and spices. It seems, if you look to the average tariff applied by the European Union in general on import of coffee, from Vietnam, you can see that the average is very low. The average duty is very low. But this hides some important issue. What is hidden? Well, it's hidden the fact that, all the trade tariff policy of all states, not only developed countries, but also developing countries, is based on the concept of trade escalation. What does it mean? This means that you apply normally very low customs duties on the import of raw materials, and the more the product is advanced with regard to the stage of production, the higher is the custom duty. Meaning that, for example, with regard to coffee, if you export raw coffee, the export of raw coffee to the European Union has to pay only 0 or 1% of custom duties. While if you export processed coffee, you have to pay 7, 6, 7, 8, or even higher custom duties. At present, Vietnam exports raw coffee to the European Union, meaning that the custom duties paid by the Vietnamese exporter to the European Union is still very low. However, this implies that the value remaining in Vietnam for the export of coffee to the European Union is very limited, because of course if you export raw coffee, you export a product which is a commodity at a very low price. So the European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement is an important incentive to improve the export of certain products from Vietnam to the European Union. One example is coffee, but another example is textiles and garments. Why? Because at the present, Vietnam export most of the exported products from Vietnam to the European Union in the textiles and garments are garments. So garments, I mean that's the finished products. And here there is an important issue to be highlighted. In order for benefiting from the trade preferences, products must originate in Vietnam or the European Union. What does it mean? This means that, there are several different methodologies to assess the origin of a product. You can imagine, if you import a fabric from China, and from the fabric you produce a garment, a final dress, and you export to the European Union rules of origin, the European Union Free Trade Agreement rules of origin must decide whether the garment is Vietnamese or whether the operation carried out on the fabric imported from China to Vietnam are not sufficient to obtain the Vietnamese origin according to the agreement. And in this case, by the European Union, customs will be treated still as Chinese products. Why this? First, because the European Union the European Union does not want to conclude an agreement with Vietnam allowing Chinese to circumvent their custom duties applied by the European Union to China when China export directly fabrics or other garments to the European Union. The European Union wants really that a product is originating from Vietnam. And in order to be originating from Vietnam, it shall the component and the material, for example, imported from third countries, shall have undertaken a substantial transformation. It's quite a complicated issue. In practice, in textiles and garments, what does it mean? This means that if you import fabric from China and you transform this fabric into a final product, garment, for example, in this type of dress, and you export to the European Union, this operation from fabric to garment, final garment, is not sufficient, according to the European Union Free Trade Agreement rules of origin, to obtain the Vietnamese origin. So the final garment produced with imported fabric from China will still be considered as Chinese and will not benefit from the preferential trade tariff applied by the European Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. In what sense, and I come back to the point, the EVFTA represents an incentive to expand the value chain of Vietnam of certain products? Well, Vietnamese producer, in order to benefit from the preferential treatment of the European Union Free Trade Agreement, they are incentivized to move on in the value chain of the textiles and garment production, trying to produce also fabrics. So you know that the textiles and garment sectors, industrial production, is composed by three main stages. From the fibers that you collect, to the yarn. This is the first stage, important. From the yarn you produce fabric, the second stage, and from the fabric you produce the final dress, the final garment, which is the third stage of production. While the first two stages, from fibers to yarn and from yarn to fabrics, are capital and technological intensive production, the third stage, from fabric to the final garment, is human labor intensive, meaning that in order for Vietnam to upgrade its value chain of textiles and garment, Vietnam has to move from a labor intensive production, transforming fabric into garment, to a capital and technological intensive production, producing at least fabrics. So Vietnam will have probably to import yarn from China or from other countries, produce fabrics, produce from fabrics the garment, and export to the European Union. This is a good incentive to upgrade the value chain of Vietnam, but of course this implies investments in terms of acquisition of technology, machinery for producing fabric, but also knowledge. You need engineers, you need technicians which are able to manage and to make this machinery producing fabrics working. This is an incentive, but this is also a challenge for the country because, of course, this type of machinery, they are very expensive and you need financial support. There is one important, interesting point. Vietnam now, at present, the export of Vietnam of final garments contains fabrics imported mainly from China, but the second source of import of fabric from Vietnam is South Korea. And in the free trade agreements, fabric with the European Union, fabrics imported from Korea are considered as Vietnamese fabric. This means that if you import fabric from Korea and you produce the final garment in Vietnam and export it to the European Union, this final garment will be considered Vietnamese, benefiting from the 0% custom duties when after 3, 5, 7 years, according to the deadline we already highlighted. This is very important. This is different from China. If fabric are imported from China and you produce garment from the fabric imported from China, the final garment will be considered Chinese and you have to pay 12%. Why this? Because the European Union has already a free trade agreement with Korea. And according to the free trade agreements, European Union already import fabrics and other textiles and garments from Korea at 0% custom duties. So for the European Union, does not make any difference to import directly fabrics from Korea or import fabrics from Korea which is contained in a garment manufactured in Vietnam. This is a very important and interesting topic which you have to take into consideration. Well, now concluding, besides this example, which is very interesting indeed, the European Free Trade Agreement provides also other important chapters. For example, a chapter on state-owned enterprises, establishing, promoting a level playing field between state-owned enterprises and private enterprise in Vietnam. This means that the beneficiaries of this equality of treatment are not only the European companies investing in Vietnam, but also the Vietnamese private companies. Because at present, you have to know that state-owned enterprises in Vietnam, they receive a sort of preferential treatment from the Vietnamese government, but also from Vietnamese other state-owned enterprises. You can imagine most of the banks of Vietnam are owned by the state. And as they are owned by the states, of course, they receive a sort of directives from the state to treat other state-owned companies better than the private sector. And this, of course, makes the situation not really comfortable for Vietnamese private companies. This is another important point that should be taken into consideration. Before concluding, what the Free Trade Agreement is not to solve. Well, be careful. As I told you, one of the most important problems for Vietnamese to export to the European Union their products, beside the fact that sometimes they are not able to comply with the European Union free rules of origin, but this is another case. There are the lack of capacities of Vietnamese producers, manufacturers, or exporters of commodities to comply with sanitary, phytosanitary, and technical standards applied by the European Union. Examples: fish and fishery products. In several cases, fish and seafood products have been found by the European importing agencies, customs and other agencies, as not compliant with European Union standard and technical regulation. For example, because they contain a quantity of chemical residuals which are dangerous for consumers' life, exceeding the ceiling provided by the European Union. So this is not going to be changed by the agreement because, of course, for European Union consumers, you cannot accept imported products, imported fish from Vietnam having a level of dangerous chemical substances, mercury and other, higher than products imported from Thailand, for example. But the agreement provides some facilitations for the recognition of the certificates and of the testing quality by the domestic laboratories. For example, it will be easier for Vietnam, once they test their products in a Vietnamese laboratory, to have the certification granted by the Vietnamese laboratories to a Vietnamese manufacturer or producer of any kind of product, recognized by European Union authorities, helping to settle several problems first, and helping Vietnamese to avoid the need to recur to very expensive laboratories in Europe in order to get the certification and export their products certified by a EU agency. Of course, prices of certification are different in Vietnam and in the European Union. Again, lastly, for the European Union side, of course, exports will benefit from tariff reduction. Services will be a bit more open. The level playing field will be ensured because of state-owned enterprises provisions, for example. But even investment will be protected because the agreement contains also a chapter on the protection of investment with a system for settling disputes. And this is very important because European investors in Vietnam will be protected by an independent system. And you know very well, in a system, in a business and legal environment like Vietnam, which is quite complicated, you know very well that this is an important element. European Union and Italian exporters, and especially investors investing in Vietnam, will not only benefit from the protection of investment in Vietnam, but will also benefit from the possibility of exporting their manufactured products in all the countries with which Vietnam has concluded free trade agreements. For example, with all the other ASEAN countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and others. With all the countries linked with ASEAN with the free trade agreement, so China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, New Zealand, because all these countries, they have a bilateral agreement with Vietnam, but also with countries with which Vietnam concluded bilateral agreements, which regional agreements with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Armenia, or bilateral agreements again with other countries like Chile. So, for European Union manufacturers and investors, investing in Vietnam means first having the possibility to serve a market of 95 million people, Vietnam, but also to export at 0% custom duties their products in other different countries linked with Vietnam by a free trade agreement. And there's so many, as I told you before. I wish you an excellent continuation of these lectures, and I hope to meet all of you soon. Goodbye.